This is the Austin family. Standon's Barn on the outskirts of Northampton. It was on this housing estate, on an ordinary street, that the Austin family made their home in 1992. For 8 years, they appeared to live the life of a typical new family. But then, in July 2000, the kids failed to appear at school and the home phone went unanswered. Claire Austin's mother Carol and her husband Harry went round to investigate, and it was then that Carol found the bodies of her daughter, 2 grandchildren and the family dogs.
I got to the kitchen door and I saw Claire and one of the dogs laying by the side of her. And I just said, "Oh my God, where are the kids?" And ran up the stairs, laying by the side of her. And I just said, "Oh my God, where are the kids?" And ran up the stairs. And Kieren was laying across his bed with his head over, and Jade was on the floor in her bedroom with one foot up on the bed, and her face was just black. Didn't even look for him. I just said to Harry, I said, "He's killed them all."
I'm Laura Richards, a criminal psychologist, and my job is to profile men like Phillip Austin. 5 years ago, I set up the Homicide Prevention Unit at New Scotland Yard. Our aim was to identify individuals who were escalating towards murder. We did this by studying past cases and identifying the early warning signs of killers. The unit was a huge success, helping reduce domestic murder by 58%. And today, I advise police nationwide on preventing murders. In this series, I want to use the skills I've learnt to highlight early warning signs and so help prevent future tragedies. Specifically, I want to look at family murders because though we often associate murder with strangers, the most common place to be killed is the family home, and the most common killer is a loved one. In this episode, I'm looking at perhaps the most chilling type of murder. The so-called family wipeout is a loved one. In this episode, I'm looking at perhaps the most chilling type of murder. The so-called family wipeout. So, just who was Phillip Austin? I want to find out more about this killer, about his crimes and whether anything could have been done to stop him. The story begins in 1991. When Austin first met his wife-to-be, Claire Golden. Diane Willis was one of Claire's closest friends at the time.
I met Claire when I was working in a shoe factory when I was about 17. Soon after that, she asked me if I wanted to go into town with her one night and go and have a few drinks, and that was it. We just started being friends from about 17. Soon after that, she asked me if I wanted to go into town with her one night and go and have a few drinks, and that was it. We just started being friends from there. About a year later, something like that, she went into town on her own with some other friends, and I didn't go that night, and that's when she met him. She rang me up and she said that she'd met a man in a pub and he brought her a rose and give it to her, and that was it. And they just were talking and chatting all night. She said he was lovely. She thought he was lovely.
Claire may have thought him lovely, but Austin wasn't quite what her friend Diane anticipated.
I think I expected somebody with a bit more, who was a bit more outgoing. He was very quiet and not shy, but he never had much opinion about anything. He was the sort of person that you didn't really notice, to be honest. Shy, but he never had much opinion about anything. He was the sort of person that you didn't really notice, to be honest.
And was like.
They had an engagement party, didn't they? Mm-hmm. And then when Kieren was born, I mean, everything just seemed to be going fine with them.
And both pleased that, Kieren had been born.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Claire absolutely doted on him, and he seemed to.
After Kieren's birth, a daughter, Jade, quickly followed, and the pair were married 3 months after that. But though the relationship seemed to be progressing happily, Austin hardly fitted the ideal of a new father and husband. The Austins' extensive home videos gives me, as a psychologist, a rare insight into the personality traits of this multiple murderer. Philip was far from a people person, and this is footage of him at his own wedding and the speech that he gave. Personality traits of this multiple murderer. Philip was far from a people person, and this is footage of him at his own wedding and the speech that he gave.
Now, I'd just like to say that it's Phil's turn to make a speech. Phil?
Well, that's what you're supposed to do.
Phil? What? You could make a speech, please.
I've got one. So just say something.
Phil? Phil? Oh, Phil?
So at this point he's being told, come on, it's your turn to make a speech, and you can just see him looking really uncomfortable, and everybody else just starts to chat amongst themselves.
Oh dear me, yeah.
He kind of just blends into the background, even at his own wedding. He doesn't take control.
Sheila? Yeah? Why is it 3
He kind of just blends into the background, even at his own wedding. He doesn't take control.
Sheila? Yeah? Why is it 3 shoes on the floor?
People just carry on around him, and he still just doesn't know what to say.
I'd just like to thank Harry and Harry. Harry and Harry. Carol and Harry. And Mick as well, coming today. And everybody else who's turning up. A happy day for me.
Yeah. Nice.
I had to say that. That's all I've got to say.
And I think that just shows us exactly what a closed book Phillip Austin is, in terms of his complete inability to express any form of emotion, even on his own wedding day, having just married the woman that he loves. To express any form of emotion. Even on his own wedding day, having just married the woman that he loves. The wedding video also reveals another trait of men who carry out family wipeouts: the lack of any friends and family. This is Austin's best man, but he was far from a best mate. In fact, Austin had no friends of his own, so he had to ask one of Claire's. And this is Austin's side of the aisle. Not only does he have no friends, but none of his family have come either, because shortly before the wedding, Austin, had severed all links with his parents. Roger and Maureen Taylor are Phillip Austin's aunt and uncle. They too were cut off when, with Claire pregnant, Phillip wrote his parents a letter ending all contact.
It did say that you'll never see your second grandchild.
So he just cut everybody off?
He cut everybody off, even his nan, because his nan had done nothing wrong at all. You know, and she loved him as much as any other grandchild. And she'd have loved his, you know, her great-grandchild, you know, but she never had the chance to, and nor did we, you know.
Having isolated himself, Austin began to show another typical trait of the family killer. He was utterly self-centred.
Every so often, like Claire would be saving for something for the children, and she'd find out that he had spent, say, £100 on a pair of trainers. Like Claire would be saving for something for the children, and she'd find out that he had spent, say, £100 on a pair of trainers. And then another time he bought a whole set of golf clubs, and yet he didn't play golf. And when she'd confront him with this, off he'd go with his carrier bag and be away for a few days.
Austin thought only of himself. When confronted by Claire about this selfishness, he simply ran away and went binge drinking. This self-centeredness and inability to deal with problems or express emotions is a high risk factor in family wipeouts. This behaviour was not conducive to a happy marriage. Not surprisingly, Claire visited a solicitor to talk about divorce. This behaviour was not conducive to a happy marriage. Not surprisingly, Claire visited a solicitor to talk about divorce. Yet fatefully, she chose to stay with her husband.
She never wanted her children to grow up in a broken home. She wanted them to have a proper family.
But I think she loved him as well, didn't she? I mean,
yeah.
Even though he did this sort of thing, you know, she still loved him, and he was the guy she wanted.
But that guy was a potential killer. Anger and resentment were building up inside him towards his wife. But just why did it spill over? And how did Austin go from someone who resented his wife to a man who would murder his entire family? From someone who resented his wife to a man who would murder his entire family. I'm Laura Richards, a criminal psychologist, and I've come to Northampton to understand more about a forklift truck driver named Phillip Austin. On the 10th of July 2000, Austin brutally murdered his wife and 2 children in the family home. Yet less than a week previously, his wife Claire had said that the relationship seemed to be improving.
She said to me on that Thursday they'd got more money than they'd had ever since they'd been together. They were saving money. And she said, "Mum, we're getting on better than we've ever done."
But I've learned from
They were saving money. And she said, "Mum, we're getting on better than we've ever done."
But I've learned from experience that appearances can be deceptive. There are always warning signs, and Austin displayed many of them. He was emotionally repressed and isolated, without any life beyond Claire and the kids. He was also selfish and manipulative, and significantly, I think he was losing the control he craved over his sons. At the same time, Claire had passed her driving test and was suddenly much less reliant on her husband. In Austin's goldfish bowl world, these subtle power shifts had an enormous effect and brought his simmering rage closer to the surface.
Kieren, careful.
In June 2000, the Austins went away with Claire's cousin's family to the Canary Islands. This home video seems to show a happy holiday, but underneath, Philip was seething. Robert Elderton, the husband of Claire's cousin, was on that holiday. He remembers seeing a different side to Phillip Austin.
So I think I was doing breakfast at the time, and I heard bang, bang, bang at the door. I goes, oh, come on in then. And he
was on that holiday. He remembers seeing a different side to Phillip Austin.
So I think I was doing breakfast at the time, and I heard bang, bang, bang at the door. I goes, oh, come on in then. And he comes in, that was it. He was just off, shouting, hollering. It was basically squaring up. I really thought we were going to have a fight, and it's not something I want to do, but...
And what was he saying? I mean, what was his issue?
It was all something to do about... It was basically just a holiday. Why did we go on this trip? Why did we do this? I don't know. There was so many little bits.
You just felt it was unnecessary compared
to... very much.
You know, nothing had really happened.
Yeah,
so.
very, very much. I mean, I just stood there. I was absolutely gobsmacked for a little while. I thought, what is this about? But...
Had he ever been like that before? Has he ever lost
I've never
his
seen
temper?
him like that before. I've never seen him like that before.
Austin's rage, so long suppressed, was nearing the surface. I've learnt that when something tips men like Austin over the edge, all hell breaks loose. And I think that something happened 2 weeks after the Austins' return from holiday. That Sunday afternoon, Philip was helping Kieren with his homework, but lost his temper. Ironically, it was the adult Philip who then stormed off to his room, cancelling a planned trip to the cinema. Austin has never revealed what was said in the row that followed, but in my experience, two subjects usually trigger family wipeouts. The first is a financial crisis. The second is the threat of separation. Whilst money was tight, I think it more likely Claire threatened to leave her selfish, controlling husband. Later that day, threat of separation. Whilst money was tight, I think it more likely Claire threatened to leave her selfish, controlling husband. Later that day, Claire's mother, Carol, phoned the house.
I phoned up at night time, it would have been about 8 o'clock, I suppose, and he answered the phone, which was most unusual. And I said, oh, hello. I said, I'm just ringing to see how you got on at the pictures. Oh, we didn't go. So I said, I'll just tell Claire I'll call her tomorrow.
But Carol was never to speak to her daughter or grandchildren again. Phillip Austin had made the decision that murder was his only option. So why doesn't Austin just run away? We know that he's done that before, but I think this time, actually, the anger has just got too great. So why doesn't Austin just run away? We know that he's done that before, but I think this time, actually, the anger has just got too great, and he's building resentment over time towards Claire, and he realises that he needs to stop this problem for good. And that's when he starts to think about this.
It's about how the children came downstairs and had their breakfast, how Claire got them ready for school, and he then took them to school. But after that, rather than going home and continuing with his sleep, which would be his normal pattern, we know that Philip went to McDonald's, that he bought himself a breakfast, he went to a local newsagent and bought the local newspaper and an auto trader, and we know that he then sat and went through those papers and circled various cars that were for sale.
Austin then was clearly planning something, but what? And how does his next move fit in?
After having his breakfast and reading the papers, he booked himself into a local massage parlour where he visited a prostitute and had sex with her, which again would appear to be totally out of character. There's himself into a local massage parlour where he visited a prostitute and had sex with her, which again would appear to be totally out of character. There's no evidence that we could find either in the house or in his history or from Philip himself to suggest that that was a regular thing. This seemed to be a one-off.
This visit to a prostitute is a bizarre twist, but it certainly underlines this was no ordinary morning. His next step was apparently more mundane. Austin visited a DIY shop and bought a mallet.
He says it's to do some patio work in the garden. Well, A, it's not the sort of mallet you buy for that, and B, you know, there's nothing else in there to indicate any work needs doing. It looks like a tidy, nice back garden.
The mallet, of course, was not for the patio. At around 1:15, Austin returned home with murder in mind and a weapon in his hand. The mallet, of course, was not for the patio. At around 1:15, Austin returned home with murder in mind and a weapon in his hand.
Philip says that he found Claire upstairs, and again, immediately he walked in the room, she challenged him as to where he'd been all morning, and then she started to argue with him again about booking a holiday. Now, we only have Philip's account of that. For all I know, Philip could have gone into the house and there could have been no argument and he could have attacked her immediately. We'll never know because obviously Claire died on that day.
In these crime scene photos, upturned ornaments and a loose slipper trace the path of a life and death struggle throughout the house.
He says, you know, suddenly there's the red mist and he takes
House.
He says, you know, suddenly there's the red mist and he takes a swing at her with the mallet and he catches her, I think, on her arm, and then the fight starts for real. He grabs hold of her, he tries to throttle her in the bedroom, they come out of the bedroom, they fight on the landing, they fight on the way down the stairs, they get into the hallway. Claire makes a dash for the front door, manages to get the door open, but Philip manages to slam it shut. They then fall into the downstairs toilet. They continue fighting in there. He's throttling her, but she manages to get him off. As she runs, either Philip catches her or she trips, throttling her. But she manages to get him off. As she runs, either Philip catches her or she trips and falls, and the moment she's on the floor, Philip's on top of her again, and basically he then throttles her again, he bangs her head up and down on the floor, and Claire starts to lose consciousness. Philip then seems to be quite systematic. You know, he retrieves the mallet from wherever he's dropped it, he strikes her on the head with that, he then opens a kitchen drawer, takes some knives out of the kitchen drawer, he stabs her in the chest, one of the knives breaks, so he continues to stab her with the second knife. And at some point in all of that melee, he also thinks to take a bra out of the washing basket and put that around her throat and try and strangle her with that as well. Thinks to take a bra out of the washing basket and put that around her throat and try and strangle her with that as well.
Claire Austin, a woman who had put up with so much from her husband, had now been killed by him. And it was a typical family wipeout attack. Despite Austin's claims of a red mist, this was premeditated. Otherwise, what was he doing buying that mallet? And he was coldly merciless. The sustained relentless attack is evidence of this. But with his wife's body lying in the kitchen and the children at school, what would he do next? The answer was to try and buy himself some time as ruthlessly as necessary. First, he killed the 2 family dogs to silence their barks, once again using the mallet to batter them to death. Next, he slid Claire's body out of view of the letterbox and the back door. Then he calmly returned to the bedroom. To them to death. Next, he slid Claire's body out of view of the letterbox and the back door. Then he calmly returned to the bedroom.
This is Claire and Philip's bedroom, and there's this pile of clothes here, fairly neatly sort of folded and put on the floor. When we open these cargo pants and lay them out, we can see that they're blood-stained around the bottom of this leg.
After telling Claire's work that she'd put her back out, Austin next went to buy the car he'd picked out that morning from Auto Trader. And for a man who had just killed his wife, Austin cut a remarkably ordinary figure. As salesman Mark Totham recalls.
He seemed perfectly fine and just nothing to raise any suspicions obviously at that time, and went had a look at the car and come back and bought the car. He didn't haggle at all. I guess looking back on it, I suppose that does seem quite suspicious of the fact that he didn't really ask any questions about the car. He just didn't haggle on the price, and he just purchased it really.
Just wanted a quick buy.
Yeah.
Having made this quick buy, Austin dumped the old family car on a nearby.
Purchased it really.
Just wanted a quick buy.
Yeah.
Having made this quick buy, Austin dumped the old family car on a nearby street. You might now expect him to make his getaway, but instead, Austin took the chilling decision to once again buy himself some time. Fatefully, he went to pick up his children from school. I'm Laura Richards, a criminal behavioural psychologist, truck driver. Phillip Austin, who in July 2000 murdered his wife and 2 children. So far, I've learnt about the self-obsessed and controlling behaviour he showed towards his wife Claire, and how resentment built to murder. Having killed his wife, you might imagine Austin would run away or hand himself in. But he did neither. Instead, Austin went to Standon's Barn School to pick up his children Kieren and Jade, children lovingly remembered by their grandparents.
Kieren was very, very affectionate. He craved affection.
For a boy, he really did. I mean, when he was with me, he used to talk to me constantly, didn't he? Oh,
he so made his ears bleed.
And I mean, Jade, he used to talk to me. constantly, didn't he? Oh,
He's so
never shut
made
up.
his ears bleed.
And I mean, Jade was an absolute little angel. She was terrific, wasn't she?
Such a pretty little thing. And they were very close together. I mean, when you see pictures of them, he's nearly always got his arm around her. You know,
The big brother.
yeah.
Phillip Austin lacked his children's affectionate nature. What's more, just as the selfish Austin related poorly to adults and lacked any friends, he also related poorly to his own children. And once again, the Austins' home video provides invaluable evidence. The Austins' home video provides invaluable evidence.
Oh, good boy.
I know, you keep bloody looking at them.
Austin's often described as passive and quiet, but yet we can see from some of the video footage that he can be quite aggressive in his play, particularly with Kieren. And this is him, you know, playing in quite an uncomfortable way, holding the baby upside down by his dungarees and his nappy and turning him round. And actually the baby's not laughing or making any signs that he's enjoying it.
Shut up.
And you can see that Kieran's in a little bit of distress here when he's just been upside down for a period of time, and he takes himself off a little unsteady on his feet to the sofa. Rough play when he's just been upside down for a period of time, and he takes himself off a little unsteady on his feet to the sofa. Rough play that didn't go unnoticed by Carol and Harry Quinn.
Yeah.
I always thought he was a bit rough with the boy when he was very young.
Oh, yeah.
What, play rough? Kind of.
Yeah.
Just,
When he was a
I
baby.
used to shudder at times. I think, you know,
doesn't feel right.
just a bit too rough, that is, you know. Too rough, that is, you know. But I mean, what do you say? You know, you're not.
Yeah, very difficult.
You're trying all the time, not, you know, to let them be parents and to, you know, not to interfere too much.
You're right. Oh, I didn't hurt you.
But as the children grew older, it...
Oh, I didn't hurt you.
But as the children grew older, it became necessary to interfere. Whilst police found no firm evidence that Austin was violent towards his wife, he was towards his children.
They used to kick the side of the breakfast bar, and I turned around and I said, "Oh, don't do that." I said, you'll knock the bricks. And he did it again. So Jade said, "Kieren, stop it or she'll get a good hiding. Won't he, Nanny?" So I looked round and I said, "No," I said, "we don't have good hidings here." So she said, "Well, we do at home, don't we, Kieren?" And Kieren said, "Yeah." He said, "Sometimes Daddy does." So Jade said, "The worst one, though," she said, "is when Daddy does that, isn't it, Kieren?" She said, "That's horrible." And Kieren went, "Yeah, it does." So Jade said, "The worst one, though," she said, "is when Daddy does that, isn't it, Kieren?" She said, "That's horrible." And Kieren went, "Yeah." He said, "That's horrible," he said, "when he does that."
Putting your hands around a child's neck is a high risk factor. Here is a man capable of severe violence, and the family recognised this warning sign. After Carol told Claire, she confronted her.
Times, did he? But he seemed to think he was okay. And when the police went to them after it all happened, they said they never once thought he was a danger.
But Austin was still a danger. On Monday the 10th of July, he killed his wife in a brutal, sustained assault before coolly covering his tracks and picking his children up from school. With Claire lying dead on the kitchen floor, Austin couldn't take his children home. So instead, he took them for a long drive, stopping to pick up fish and chips when the children got hungry. This ordinary behaviour might appear startling, but such actions are not uncommon in the aftermath of a murder. Professor Kevin Brown of Nottingham University has examined in detail the behaviour of killers after they strike.
What we find very common with all violent offences is very shortly after, the distortions in the murderer's mind denies that it happened. And so even as he collected his children from school, he'd already, in his mind, repressed the memory of killing his wife. So his mind represses that memory in order to do the day-to-day task of picking up his children. However, the memory's still there because he can't take them home. He has to drive them around, so his mind is in dissonance. It's going from one thought to another.
And it was in this state of dissonance that Austin drove Jade and Kieren around for more than 7 hours. He even drugged his children's drinks with herbal sleeping pills. But what would he do next?
Philip says that on the way home, he does consider whether to drop the children at their grandparents'. In effect, pull up, put the children out of the car outside Granny's house and go. But he makes a rational decision not to do that.
Did he say why?
No, he didn't say why. My own suspicion would be that he doesn't do that because he knows that the first thing they'll do is go to the house and obviously they'll find Claire. So he takes the children home, they go to bed. He doesn't really give any explanation as to what happens for the next little while, but then Jade asks for a glass of water. To do that, he has to go into the kitchen, and he says he goes in for the next little while, but then Jade asks for a glass of water. To do that, he has to go into the kitchen, and he says he goes in the kitchen, sees Claire's body, realises what's happened, what he's done. It all comes home to him, and he makes the decision at that point that he's going to kill the children as well. He goes to Jade's bedroom first. He said he tries to strangle her. He's not successful, so he takes a cord from a dressing gown, strangles her with that. And he then goes to Kieren's bedroom with a strap that parents often use to hold on to their children, and he uses that to strangle Kieren with.
Austin may have shown his aggressive side with Kieren and Jade before, but his real resentment was against his wife. So the big question here is, why did he kill his children? He makes out that it's because he's taken the kids to bed and he's gone into the kitchen and seen Claire lying there and he's remembered that he's killed her. But I don't think you would forget what happened. And I think maybe when he sees the children, he realises that they're going to ask about Mum and they're going to ask about where the dogs are, and he won't be able to explain that away. Maybe he's also thinking about the fact that he can't care for them. He hasn't got the ability to look after them. They're going to ask about where the dogs are, and he won't be able to explain that away. Maybe he's also thinking about the fact that he can't care for them. He hasn't got the ability to look after them. So I think, sadly, he takes a decision that the only way out of this is to kill the children as well. Austin's extreme self-centeredness meant he put his need to avoid problems and remain in control above even the lives of his own children. Having murdered Claire, Kieren and Jade in one day, Phillip Austin disappeared. Meanwhile, on Stockmead Road, neighbours began to notice a lack of activity at number 76. Local journalist Paul Jeeves was the first reporter on the scene and pieced together what happened next. Local journalist Paul Jeeves was the first reporter on the scene and pieced together what happened next.
After a week, neighbours were becoming concerned because Claire and Kieren and Jade hadn't actually been seen at all, and the red Fiesta that Claire drove remained outside the family home and hadn't moved for that week. So they contacted Kieren and Jade's school just to express concern. They hadn't actually been seen. The school then contacted Carol and Harry Quinn, who then went round and were obviously confronted with the scene of the three bodies. I mean, it just you can't imagine what they were going through.
Police were quickly on the scene and greeted by a nightmare. Thoughts quickly turned to the missing family member, Phillip Austin. Was he a potential victim to murder? Thoughts quickly turned to the missing family member, Phillip Austin. Was he a potential victim too, or was he the killer?
Over the next 24 to 36 hours, it became more and more apparent that Phillip was most likely the person responsible.
But just where was triple murderer Phillip Austin? In July 2000, Phillip Austin killed his wife and children, then fled the murder scene. In my experience of analysing these so-called family wipeouts, it is common for the murderer to attempt to take his own life too. So with his family dead, did Austin see a reason to keep living? The answer, it became apparent, was yes.
Working very closely with...
The answer, it became apparent, was yes.
Working very closely with the family bank, it was obvious to us very quickly that in fact Phillip was alive and well and was moving around the north of the country.
In between the murders and the discovery of the bodies, Austin went to the seaside. He stayed at guest houses in Scarborough, Whitley Bay and Blackpool and appeared unaffected by his brutal crimes.
In many respects, he was an ideal customer. He was quiet, he kept himself to himself, he paid his bills on time, so he really wasn't any trouble. He bought himself top shelf magazines, he visited the pub. You know, he didn't seem to be acting like a man who wasn't any trouble. He bought himself top shelf magazines, he visited the pub. You know, he didn't seem to be acting like a man on the run. He seemed to be having quite a comfortable week, really.
But that comfortable week came to an abrupt halt when the news broke that Claire, Kieren and Jade had been found. Shortly afterwards, Cumbrian police officer Sean Onions was called to a lay-by just outside Kendal.
Well, I was in the control room at Kendal Police Station and a call came in to say a man had been seen in the Ashes Lane lay-by acting suspiciously with his arms covered in blood. So I took a trip out in my patrol car. When I arrived in Ashes Lane, I saw a Granada parked up with a chap sitting in the back seat. When I went to speak to him, I saw that he'd slashed his wrists.
But
Parked up with a chap sitting in the back seat. When I went to speak to him, I saw that he'd slashed his wrists.
But Phillip Austin had not succeeded in killing himself.
Well, we find this quite common in family annihilators, that their intention is to kill themselves, but apparently they are unable to. That they seem to be able to kill others, but not to kill themselves.
What's more, it wasn't the trauma of killing his family that triggered this apparent attempt. It was the news that the bodies were discovered and the police were looking for him.
While he was visiting Scarborough and staying in guest houses, people said he was behaving quite normally and seemed to be enjoying his little holiday. I don't buy it.
I mean,
if
you seriously want...
People said he was behaving quite normally and seemed to be enjoying his little holiday. I don't buy it.
I mean,
if
you seriously want to kill yourself, it's not that difficult. He found it easy enough to kill his wife and his 2 children, and yet he didn't have the guts to kill himself. So he didn't intend to.
In Cumbria, though, PC Sean Onions was of course unaware he was dealing with a multiple murderer.
I immediately felt compassion for him. He'd obviously been through something. Initially, I stayed with him while he was in casualty. He was just completely emotionless. You've heard the expression, lights on and no one home, but that just summed him up. He wasn't aggressive, he wasn't in any way argumentative. He would just speak when spoken to, and the rest of the time just be gazing off into the distance.
It was a remoteness familiar to all who knew Austin. After his arrest, he was flown to Northampton and interviewed immediately. And yet again, this man who was once stressed by his 8-year-old's homework appeared unfazed by the murder of his family.
What was he appearing like? Was he distraught, or was he...
No, he was very calm.
What was he appearing like? Was he distraught, or was he...
No, he was very calm. He was very collected. He didn't become distressed at all in the interviews. His final comment in the interview, when the officers pushed him to try and find out how he felt in hindsight now, was he said he wasn't proud. He wasn't proud of what he'd done.
And this proved as much as this cold, self-absorbed man would ever say about murdering his own family. In court, Austin was just as emotionless as he had been in police interviews, and indeed at his own wedding.
It was a packed courtroom, but again, he just stood there, didn't say anything, didn't show really any emotion at all when obviously he entered the guilty pleas. But very little was said. It still remained, stood there, didn't say anything, didn't show really any emotion at all when obviously he entered the guilty pleas. But very little was said. It still remains a real mystery, perhaps, as to why he went as far as he did to actually commit these murders. It really just, it's something that the police have never been able to perhaps pinpoint. There was obviously tension in the family. He'd showed a degree of anger, the anger management courses, and obviously the NSPCC with the violence shown towards the kids. But I don't think anyone dreamed that he would be capable of what he actually did.
But I think we need to go further than that. We need to understand men like Phillip Austin, because when it comes to murder, the most likely killer is a family member. So what can we learn from the Austin case? What were the signs? Because though to family friends... So what can we learn from the Austin case? What were the signs? Because though to family, friends and agencies, the attacks came out of the blue, I believe all held different bits of information that when put together paint a picture of alarming risk. There was his remoteness, lack of support structure and isolation, his self-centred view of life, his feelings of inadequacy, his strict, controlling violence towards his children, and the control he attempted to exert over his wife. But if those are the warning signs and character traits of a killer, the family of Claire, Jade and Kieren are still left with the biggest question of all.
But why? That is something I'll never know. And as far as I'm aware, he's never shown any remorse, never given a reason. That is something I'll never know. And as far as I'm aware, he's never shown any remorse, never given a reason.
The closest Austin has ever come to revealing a reason came during a prison visit from his father and his uncle Roger.
When I did go to the prison, he did try to blame his parents. And I said to him there and then, there's only one person to blame here, and that's you. Don't even think of telling me that your parents are to blame, because they're not.
How did he try and blame them?
Well, the way, you know, he tried to say that they hit him and his dad used to hit him with a belt and all this business. And I came home from the prison with his dad and I was crying in the car because I knew I had to ask this question. And I did say to him, David, when you walked out, Phillip said to me, and I was crying in the car because I knew I had to ask this question. And I did say to him, David, when you walked out, Phillip said to me, it's their fault because they used to hit me with a belt. And then you know, his dad said, no. He said, oh, not really. He said, I used to smack him, yes. He said, but not cruelly. And it was another way of Phillip trying to, you know, blame somebody else for what he'd done. And you can't do that.
Of his complete lack of self-awareness.
We were sitting there chatting to him and he said to Roger, oh, I haven't heard anything about my CDs and whatever. And Roger went bang like this on the desk.
Yeah, I thought I lost it.
Didn't it?
Yeah.
And he said, turned around and he said, I think you've got more things to think about than them. He said, what you've done. And he just seemed to wash over the top of his head.
And he's turned out to be an evil man, really. Whereas when he was younger, he was such a lovely lad.
Today, Phillip Austin is serving a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 20 years. It's a jail term that has led Carol and Harry Quinn to join with the National Victims Association in campaigning for killers to spend their lives behind bars. In my experience, the perpetrators of family wipeouts often serve shorter sentences than multiple murderers to spend their lives behind bars. In my experience, the perpetrators of family wipeouts often serve shorter sentences than multiple murderers who take the lives of strangers. I think this is wrong. Not only is the crime equally serious, but in some cases, a family killer can become a killer of strangers. If someone can objectify and kill the people closest to them, they can do anything. So we need to understand the risk posed by men like Phillip Austin. And we need to remember Claire, Kieren and Jade and learn the tragic lessons of their deaths to help stop more family killers.